Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee today, Wednesday, January 19. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and the public have been duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. First order of business is approval of previous meeting minutes on November 16th. Do I have a motion to approve?
That's so moved.
Second.
I wasn't here.
Do I have this?
I went back and looked at the,
You need to make a second.
You need to approve second and then discuss it.
okay, I'll second the motion.
Okay, discussion.
I went back and looked at the video of the meeting. I think there were some points that were left out. You're gonna ask me exactly what. And I didn't really write them down, but that's why I was being silent. I just was hoping someone else.
If you feel that there's something that you missed, then probably next time the best thing to do is to the meeting and read them into the record.
Right, exactly, I know. I just wanted to say that's why I didn't second it right away, because I had hesitancy. I'm through with my discussion.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Passed unanimously. Second item is the review of the financial statements, and Debbie Suggs will lead us in that review.
Certainly. So we have the December results to review 6 months into the city's fiscal year.
Debbie, I'm sorry. For some reason, the agenda does not include citizens' comments. I think that was my miss. I don't know why it was not included. I know that Ms. Hill was planning on giving you all an update on a couple of things through citizens' comments. It's typical for an agenda to have citizens' comments to provide the public an opportunity to talk to you all. So you may want to consider a motion to add citizens' comments to the agenda, and then you can have citizens' comments. Citizens would have 3 minutes to address the committee.
Do I have a motion to add citizens' comments to the agenda?
I make a motion to add.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, now you may entertain that section of the agenda now.
Okay.
And
We will now entertain citizens' comments. Helen, would you like to address the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be the host.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to give you a very brief update today through citizens' comments. I'm Helen Hill. I'm the CEO of Export Charleston. And just want to follow up on a couple things. I think this is the good news, bad news story. And I'm going to start with it's really not bad news, but a cautionary thing is that sadly, we've seen, particularly in our group business, with this uptick in this variant of COVID, some of our groups choosing to reschedule. I know that doesn't shock any of you. The good news is we have not seen that same trend with our individual travelers. And so I hope that when you get to hear Debbie's report, you will continue to have that good news. On the front of our website, I wanted to let you know that we've made some tremendous progress. I want to particularly thank Desiree and the team for sending that out to the businesses on the Isle of Conference. We have collected information. Desiree and I laughed yesterday. I think we might have to beat the bushes a little bit because we haven't gotten as many responses as we had hoped, but we are on the path. And lastly, just to give you the good news, we've had a great meeting with a new group of folks that are working to start a Isle of Palms Chamber of Commerce. And actually the president is at my office right now looking at how we can work together on the website. So I wanted to give you that good news. I know that's a follow-up of several things that this community is particularly interested in. And thank you for this time.
Thank you, Helen. Are there any other citizens' comments? Okay, then Deputy, the floor is yours.
Okay. So December results, balance sheet, cash position is approximately $2.9 million as of 12/31/21 compared to 1.9 million this time last year. The liabilities are the biggest part of that 398,000 is the payment due to the CBB. Then we have ending fund balance of $2.4 million. Next page is revenues. This is the payment received minus the portion that goes to the general fund. 1.258. And then a little bit of interest. Going on to expenditures, public restroom operations, ongoing expenses related to the Front Beach restroom, continued expenses related to beach trash pickup. Next page, you can see the 30% distribution to the CVB. And payment for 1/3 of the SCBA equipment, the fire department. I think I reported on that last time. And then the last page shows the sponsorships that this committee has approved, the 1,000 to the surf club, 15,000 to the VFW, and 10,000 to MUSC for the Vela sponsorship. I wanted to mention briefly this schedule so that y'all can see the amount received for the September quarter. And that translates to heads and beds in June, July, and August to kind of give you a perspective. And you can see it's a considerable sum, $1.3 million. And if you look across the page, you can see that's the biggest September we've ever had. And in fact, it's 50% of the total we received in FY21. So accommodations activity is booming right now. And then you can see this schedule shows the calculation of how the payment received from the state is split up. So you can see that the general fund gets basically $25,000 a year plus 5%, and then 65% is the pool of money that this committee has purview over, and then the 30% tourism promotion piece.
Is that it?
That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Deb?
Go ahead.
I have a question. I'm very respectful of CBB and their efforts. And you've always, I've gone back as far as I could and found that you've been exceptionally transparent, Debbie, in providing us and the public with an indication of where our money is going. One of my concerns is that I must sound like a broken record, but we have no contract, no metrics, almost no oversight. We turned down, we didn't approve the budget from that was proposed for this fiscal year. Council has I guess a placeholder account because we're required to pay what's called the 30% to somebody, but it isn't indicated to who. I'm trying to figure out, just get my mind around and you can help me understand why we're giving it to somebody, and specifically it's not in compliance with the procurement code. And council hasn't approved it. This isn't any criticism of you. I'm trying to get my mind around it. Maybe our attorney can help us understand, but I'm just having a real hard time. I understand we're required to immediately put it in a segregated fund, but it seems to be implicit in the procurement code that there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. So I'm trying to figure out If you know, it may be for the attorney to tell us. I don't know, but I'm having trouble with that. 397,000, that may mean that we're on the hook for an entire year, and that's projected to be more than, probably more than $800,000 for the year. So please help me understand, why are we giving them the money when they haven't been designated according to the procurement code? And I went back and looked at old minutes and couldn't find a sole source exception. I looked at the council minutes, couldn't find it. Maybe there is. I don't know.
I know that the committee has asked questions about the procurement code and being in compliance with the procurement code. Other questions that I know the committee wants to hear legal advice on. So we'll address those as you all requested. Every year through the budgeting process, the city approves the CVB as the city's direct marketing organization. You can see there's a placeholder, as you mentioned, in the budget, and it assigns the Charleston Visitors Bureau as the recipient of that allocation. Until an alternative is developed by the city, then the city will have a different alternative and a different option of how that state disbursement needs to be issued. The city reports to Turk every year who this allocation goes to, who the direct marketing organization goes to. So the CVB has been properly selected by the city as the DMO.
Okay. I just don't understand it. Again, I'm looking at the procurement code, and it says we can have a sole source, but you've got to have it detailed why we did it. You got to have it approved by the council specifically, and it's not there. And one of the other reasons I'm saying this is in 2002, the Attorney General said that there was a process that ought to be followed. 2015 said the same thing. You have the domains case that says that we're supposed to look at these things. Then you have a 2021 Attorney General's opinion. And I'm saying this to be trying to look out for us if we've made them, and Turk has never looked at these before. So we're in a new territory, we're in a new area, perhaps the law, and I'm trying to make sure that we're doing what's right. And I can't understand what with the process, because there's nothing in the minute, there's nothing in the council minutes that said we should have a sole source or a justification for it. I hope there is. I want to do this the right way. But maybe Mr. Halverson can tell us. I'm not convinced, based on the Attorney General's opinions, at least 3 of them, of what Turk has said in the past, that they weren't going to have any oversight on this. All they were looking at was the grants. That's all they've ever looked at. And now it looks, after what Turk has told us recently and after the domains case, that we're supposed to look at this pretty hard. So maybe Mr. Halvers can tell us, but I'm looking, maybe he'll tell us that we don't have to comply with the procurement code, that the state says we're supposed to give it to somebody, and we are required to set it aside, but it doesn't say that we have to give it to anybody specifically. So what is there that we can, I'm trying to look out for the Isle of Palms when I say this, what can I look at specifically that says the conscious decision was made to give it to one sole source? And respectful of CVB, and Debbie has done a masterful job. She's explained every year that the money was going. What do we say? Maybe I'm just thinking out loud. Could we argue ratification, maybe? Or just what do we say?
We can go, you can entertain a motion to go into executive session if you want to hear from the attorney on that. But he's not, the city attorney does not give legal advice in open session.
Okay. Well, I'm not really seeking legal advice per se. I just want to know what the lay of the land is. What laws apply? Does the procurement code apply? Does it not apply? apply. I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing and that we don't get caught because, by law, if we make a mistake, the treasurer can take our money away. In this case, about $2.5 million reallocated if we're not doing it right. So I want to be careful. If we haven't done it right, of course, we can ask the money be returned and then put it into a designated fund until we figure out if we've done it the right way, and we've got a capable attorney that can help us. But we're dealing with millions of dollars of taxpayers' money, and I'm thinking out loud, but we ought to have this done. We're talking about public's money. We ought to deal with this in the public and not hide behind a secret meeting where we can't even tell council what we've done. If we go into executive session, the public doesn't know, the council will never know. And that's why I asked that we have this in public rather than, I think you might have gotten my email where I asked that this be put on the agenda so we could discuss it in public. I'm not opposed necessarily going into executive session, but I just feel like we're dealing with taxpayers' money. They have a right to know what we're doing with it.
Mr. Trezor, I'm Brent Halverson here. There are legal considerations that are to be taken into something to take into account, and things that council will be taking into account. Because of that, I don't think it would be appropriate to discuss those in an open forum.
May I speak?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, I'm concerned as well because we have 3 active recommendations going to council, which they haven't reviewed yet. One of them is that we hold the money in an account until decisions are made and selections are made and decisions are made about procurement and contract and all the open-ended questions we have. Another one is that we did not approve the budget going forward that's been presented to us from the DMO, but that's been used in the past. That to me says we're recommending that we need to look and get more information. We've asked for that. It's an active motion that council's waiting and hasn't made a decision on. The third motion that we still have sitting in the queue waiting to be handled is about looking at alternative and other options, which implies that there's more than one choice. The next concern I have is that I keep hearing that our purview is the 30% tourism promotion fund.
65% is your purview.
Our purview is the 65% and the 30%. So I just might have misunderstood what you just said. This committee has oversight over everything but the $25,000 and the 5%. Everything else is 65% and the 30% this committee has purview. It's in the law. I read it. I can read it to you if you want me to. So we need to clarify that. If I'm reading the law wrong, then that needs to be explained. And the third thing I'd like to say is I went through all the FOIA documents that I could find in all the Robert's Rules of Order about executive session. And I understand that you're saying that it's been the past council's policy. We have a new council now, pretty much, almost all new, and a new mayor, and that it was the past council's policy to use executive session that had anything to do with legal discussions. However, the law doesn't support that. And there are documents and guidelines that come to us in which the governor, Alan Wilson's been asked for support or to weigh in on the use of executive session. Citizens from Isle of Palms have come and spoken numerous times about the overuse of executive session and are we even using it correctly? So I think there needs to be some clarity around executive session. If you're asking questions about a state law and procedure, my question is, I couldn't find anything in FOIA that prevented that being discussed in the public. If we were discussing a lawsuit, a personnel issue, an adversarial legal issue, anything like that, then perhaps there was a reason. So until we get a policy from the new council, I think maybe we need some clarification. But today we just wanted to have a general discussion in front of the public of what the law actually says and allows, and get get the interpretation of our city attorney.
I'm sorry, I'm not willing to apply the law. I'm happy to talk to you in open session about what the law says. The law says what it says. You can read it, I can read it. As is pertaining to the issues you brought up in the previous meetings, those would be applications of the law, my interpretation of them to you and to council, that I don't feel comfortable talking to you about in an open forum. And I can explain my rationale for that concern if you would like to have executive session. Otherwise, whatever I can talk to you about in an open forum will be limited simply to state law and what the procedure says. And it's something that's available to you and to the public. I don't think that that's the information that you're wanting to glean based on what I saw at your previous sessions. That helps.
I appreciate your view. We'll agree to disagree. But as our legal advisor, you certainly trump my opinion.
Okay, what I would suggest concerning the executive session is we do in fact go into an executive session at the end of the meeting. However, the purpose, we should state the purpose of that executive session, because I'm not in favor of going into executive session to discuss things that I think are worthy of public consumption. But saying that, I think us as a group, as a committee, we need training. We need an understanding of the law. But I would support going into executive session to get training on the understanding of the law. And once we have that basis of understanding, let me backtrack a bit. We have pretty much done what City Council has asked us to do. So to my way of thinking, we need more direction. So the idea here is to get an understanding of the law, a basis for the law, and if we get further direction, further
Assignment.
instructions or assignments from City Council, we can then apply our understanding at that point of the law to the questions of procurement code, to the questions of a contract, to the questions of parking money in a separate account in lieu of creating our own, potentially our own nonprofit DMO. So so I'm sort of, you can say I'm on the fence in that I agree that a lot of what we want to discuss is worthy of being open to the public. However, I don't think we've heard enough to get the training we need to understand the law, and that's what I would support going into executive session about.
Well, and just to be very clear, every time the city council goes into executive session is to either discuss a personnel matter, to receive legal advice or legal update on any pending litigation, or receive legal advice on any issue. The questions that have been presented by this committee that I'm not able to answer because I'm not I'm not the city's attorney. This committee has repeatedly asked to hear from the city attorney, so that's why he's here. The questions that have been asked by this committee will be stated before we go into executive session. And the legal advice and any discussion in executive session will be limited to those questions, which you properly articulated are related to the, whether or not the city's been following proper procurement code, whether the city can withhold that money in a separate account while city council makes a decision about an alternative moving forward. What can the city do with the expenditure of 30% funds? Because we've had the conversation here. Can the city use it for anything other than tourism promotion and advertisement? That requires legal advice and an interpretation of the law. And those topics have to be addressed by the city attorney. And the city, I will not make a decision for city council to waive attorney-client privilege. That's something that council will decide to do. In the meantime, anytime we receive legal advice will be, has to be done in executive session unless city council votes to waive that privilege. So just for clarity and for the public, whenever the city goes into executive session, those conversations are limited to those questions. And whenever, there's the attorney will say, this is not an executive session conversation. And then in open session, once you have that baseline understanding, you all can have further discussion about alternatives based on, an assignment from city council.
Okay, I would add to the list, the question of the appropriateness of having a contract with the
Correct.
nonprofit DMO with measurable metrics. I mean, that was sort of like the fourth one, or just want to make sure that's included in the
Yeah.
mix.
And I just for the, we want to make sure we follow the agenda. So
Right.
we're
Yeah,
we're
so-
still under financial statements.
Right. Agreed.
Some of the things I would like to know would be, and I don't think this would be in the nature of legal advice, but I would like to know when we selected a DMO that we're currently using, when it was, by whom, how long, what was the period of time. That's not secret information that should be hidden from the public. I'm in favor of having, where at all possible, having our meetings open when we're dealing with the public's money. I would like to know, maybe Mr. Halverson is a very capable attorney by reputation. This is the first time I've met him, but he enjoys a very good reputation in the city, has him, confidence in him as our attorney. But there's somewhere in the minutes, it's got to be in the minutes and documentation of how and why we selected somebody to be our DMO. Another concern I had, and I'm sure you can tell me now, we knew this was coming up. If you tell me that council has told us for this meeting that anything Mr. Halverson tells us should be hidden in secret meetings, I could at least understand it. So maybe that's threshold. Has council indicated that we should do this in executive session, or have they not said anything? We advise them and we want them to have this information. One of my problems is if we go back in executive session, what we say, we can't tell the public, we can't tell council. It seems that it's hidden from them. If we have made an error, on the other hand, at some point in time, or maybe there's another way to look at it, and the question became how to fix it, or terms of a contract, and how to negotiate the terms of a contract, I would understand completely going into executive session. But Attorney General's opinions are open to the public. I'm aware of the angst that was created in Sullivan's Island with the Maritime Forest when there was an appearance that things were done in secret, and it doesn't matter which side you're on, it just was upsetting to the public because they didn't have an opportunity to know. Finally, South Carolina Code 30-4-15 says it's vital to hold these meetings in public unless we have an exceptional reason that has been stated on the record. And I've looked at the Donahue case. They wouldn't mean much to a lot of people except Mr. Halverson, but the Donahue case, the Ballard case in Newberry, the Burton case in York County, where we potentially put the city at a lot of risk if we make a mistake and go into executive session when we shouldn't, or we haven't provided adequate notice. So I might suggest that we start off in public and ask these questions, and then if we have to go into executive session, I would understand, but I don't at this point in time.
So the only item that you have on the agenda for action and discussion today is the next order of business, which is the request that you have in your packets.
Yes.
Again, at the last meeting, the committee made a specific request wanting to hear from the city attorney. As Mr. Halverson stated, he can address questions specifically to the law, but will not go into any legal advice or any discussion about interpretation. so we don't have to have executive session. The executive session and the discussion and providing legal advice will go to city council as they evaluate the recommendation that this committee has already made to them, which will be discussed later this month. So this committee doesn't have to go into executive session to receive legal advice on the questions that have been presented by the committee. But the only action item that you have listed on the agenda is for that request for funding, which is under the 65% allocation that this committee has purview over.
But I asked that this be put on the agenda. I sent you an email.
And we did amend the agenda to have citizens' comments. Couldn't we use the same process to amend the
Sure.
agenda?
You can amend the agenda and add, you can't take any action. So that's the rule from MASC. You can add an item for discussion, but now no action, no final action, which this being an advisory committee would not have any final action on any item, but you can certainly do that.
I would make the motion, but respectfully, Mr. Halverson has said he won't discuss it. So if I make the motion, could we ask some of these questions and could you give us some information, training information, whatever you want to call it, and then reserve the stuff that you feel needs to be done in executive session? Could we do like a half and half?
The city has historically not done training in open session.
Well, let's not call it training. Let's call it information gathering by an advisory committee.
Well, so like I said previously, I'm happy to answer any question about which particular law applies to this body and procedure, which is, again, something I think be happy to answer those questions. If you have a particular question on law or procedure, I don't think that that's what the concerns that I've seen historically that have been raised in the ATAX committee. I'm happy to do it either way you want.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we add to the agenda a general discussion of procedure and what the law says, state law requires concerning ATAX funds, procurement, RFPs, process, and then consider executive session for anything that's considered out of the purview of the public discussion.
You got that, Nicole? Just for the sake of time, Debbie and I have a budget workshop today at 12. We secured an hour for this meeting, so just want to make everybody aware. It's 11:30 and we still have another item on the agenda.
Robert's Rules of Order say that the staff does not have to be present if we go into executive session, so that would free you all up.
Cool.
Their minutes don't have to be taken. They're not part of a public record. So the purpose of inviting staff for an executive session would be if you have specific information to provide, not to give opinions, but to provide facts and information that we need. So we could probably do it. You could go to your meeting.
I would not feel comfortable.
No,
Okay.
I'll be attending this executive session.
I'm just letting you know what Robert Rules of Order allows and says is appropriate for executive session. It doesn't say you have to be there.
But he said he's not coming.
Right. If our city attorney doesn't want to abide by that, then we can't do anything about that.
Okay, I'd like to get back on track with the agenda.
There's a
I-
motion on the floor.
Because it was not.
Okay, there's motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
I would second.
Any
But I have a motion to rearrange the agenda at this time. We've got somebody here from the public who's going to make a presentation for a grant. Can we,
We'll have to come
while
back
this
to
is
that.
pending, can we move to something else?
No.
Okay, we have to vote on this, then we can rearrange it. Is that right?
Yes.
You have to make it, the motion on the floor has to be dealt with briefly.
Any possibility you can reread that motion? No, I didn't think so.
But you can also, I mean, she's asking to go, she's asking to to rearrange the agenda, or to add something to the agenda, such that you all can ask questions of the city attorney regarding procedure, and what the law says about ATAX funds in the process regarding ATAX money. That short enough version to that, she wants to add that to the agenda. And I'm assuming that she means right now, as opposed to before or after these people.
I would, can I amend that to, or change that to after we do the new business?
Trust in a second.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Mr. Tressler,
Yes.
Mr. Burr,
Nay.
Mr. Rock,
Nay.
motion fails.
Okay.
Again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. Purpose of my intention, or my vision for the executive session, is to get guidance on understanding the law specific to our various questions. Then we wait for further direction from city council on what they would like us to do. And at that point, we move forward with what the requests are from us, from city council. If we need to go into executive session at that point, once we know what we're tasked with doing, then so be it. But I feel as though at this point in time, we're not specific enough about what we're at least I haven't heard. I know what the questions are, but I also know that he's not going to answer. He's already said he's not going to answer those questions. So I feel like we're spinning our wheels until we get further direction from city council. I guess that's all I have to say about that. So Debbie, you're completed with your financial review.
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'd like to move to the new business for the discussion of the request for ATAX funding from the Law Enforcement Neighborhood Support Group Program. I don't know your name, so I'm
Yes, so
sorry.
I was going to introduce myself. So first of all, thank you for letting me speak today, but then thank you for adjusting the agenda so that I didn't have to sit here for another half hour. So I'm Kim Riley. I'm the current president of the Exchange Club, and I also run a training service group within the Exchange Club. So we've done a lot of partnerships with the city. Also a 22-year resident, so I've been told that makes me a native now. So I'm representing Ted Kinghorn, who is also a member of the Exchange Club, with the previous council member, and he will be leading the law enforcement neighborhood support system. So the acronym for it is LENS, and I'll refer to it as the LENS program. What I wanted to do today is to provide you with a brief overview of the program, to tie in with tourism, and then respond to any questions that you might have. And in the overview, what I'd like to cover is our mission, our focus, the oversight, and the financials on how the money that we procure will be spent. So regarding the mission, really the mission is to support our, to work with our law enforcement group on the Isle of Palms, specific to Isle of Palms, and provide them with support that we can strengthen community relations and public safety. So when we speak about community, we're talking about tourists, visitors, as well as our residents. The money that we're asking for from this committee would be focused on tourists and visitors. The focus that we plan is to give back to the community. So the Exchange Club is an organization that we have a nonprofit arm. That's what we have been focused on, and what we give back in a number of different areas back to our communities. So we'll give back to the community by supporting initiatives that focus on families and the needs that the police department identified. So examples would be hardship, and I'll go through some of that. So if there's a hardship case that's identified through the police department, we have visitors that have come into town. They run into some kind of issue, they need support. If funding is required for that, a recommendation would come to our selection committee. They would make a decision within 48 hours to whether to allot the funds to the request that's come in. So really, it's a conduit to work with the police department to help identify needs of our visitors and our tourists, in addition to the residents. The residents would come out of our other funds that we collected through the community. The other thing too is that we will, and this isn't really the allocation that we're looking for from this group, but another thing that we'll focus on is appreciation and recognition of our police department. So really trying to improve the morale of the police department and help with, I know in the past, we've had some issue with recruiting positions into the police department. So that would be one of our measurements as to overall, but not specifically related to the ATAX. So some of the initiatives that we would focus on, as I mentioned, would be hardships. So we look to work with the police department for them to identify if there's been issues with our visitors, with our tourists. Also events, we put on events that would include both our visitors and tourists, as well as our residents. Examples of this would be that in May, there's the Public Safety or Police Week. And so we're gonna be sponsoring several events as it relates to that, and our visitors and tourists would be welcome to those, and we put out invitations through social media. The recognition, as I mentioned, we'll do some recognition events that we've kind of done informally as part of the Exchange Club, but we're gonna formalize that. Now, depending upon what that looks like, we determine whether that should go against ATAX or not, but most likely that would come from our internal funds. And then various community support. So as it relates to tourists, some of the things that we could potentially do is improve education, public safety education. I know one of the things that happens when we have tourists that come that aren't familiar with the area, there's certain things like safety out at the beach that I think we could do a better job of education. And we could work with the local businesses, some of the real estate companies to work on that. The oversight, we have an oversight panel, a selection panel made up of 3 people. Ted would lead that. We have one of the 2 other residents from the island, Tony Jones and Carol Trousseau. And Tony has foundation experience, so those 3 are also members of the Exchange Club. And then we have an overall advisory board that's made up of folks from within the exchange, from the community, and from the businesses. And so the selection panel would make ultimate decisions based on recommendations from the police department on how the money is spent. And then the Lens Advisory Board will work with Ted to help create, and with the police department to create our agenda. What are the areas we want to focus on? And then as it relates to the financials, we were asking the ATAX committee for a $5,000 grant. So far, we've seen a lot of support from the community. So from the community, we've raised approximately $25,000. A combination of, so about a third of it has come from foundations in the area, a third of it from local residents, and a third from businesses. So we've seen really good support in a very short period of time. Ted kicked this off in December, and like the middle to end of December, and quickly within a couple of weeks, we were able to glean a lot of community support. So our goal this year is we'd like to get the 25,000, but then we're gonna do different fundraisers to get up to $50,000 to have in the fund. And again, as I mentioned, the 5,000 grant that we're looking for would be specifically focused on tourists and visitors. I think that's, and just as informational, in working with the police chief, Kevin Cornett, he had identified that in previous years, they've identified a need of $10,000 to $15,000 for hardship cases. So we're, as we move along over the course of the program, we'll build out the financials even further, and as we get more experience, we'll understand how much money we're going to need to spend in the other areas. How does it support tourism? So directly, how it supports tourism is through support of hardship cases that our visitors might have, and indirectly through the improvement of public safety and the education of our visitors and tourists, as well as our current residents. And then indirectly, some of the other things too is police morale through the recognition programs. And one of the things that I know I personally, because I used to come into the area to visit, as many people do, and I finally migrated here. What's really important to visitors is public safety. And so when they come to visit, because Isle of Palms is known as a family-friendly island, so it's really important that our public safety is recognized, and there are ratings that are provided to small town, large town. I think that's one of the things we anticipate helping this program, helping our police department to further improve in that area. I think I went through most of the funding. I think that's it. I know one of the questions that I personally had that I think Desiree might have had. Why just the police department? Are you going to expand it? So initially, what our plan is to focus on working with the police department for the first year, and then there's potential to expand to the fire department as well. So that's what I have. So I entertain any questions if the group has.
First of all, thank you very much for coming and giving us that report. I read through the application and there weren't no attachments, so I didn't know what the grant was for. You've explained somewhat. I'm gonna ask you to a couple of things. One is that we need a copy of the report and the financials, and also how at the end of the year, you're going to account back to us for how the money was spent for transparency and accountability. Second, there are three groups you mentioned: tourist visitors and community. ATAX money cannot be used to community benefit. It cannot be used for day visitors. It can only be used for tourists, and tourists are defined as people who come from over 50 miles away. So that has to be adhered to with that money in order for us to be compliant with the state. So we would, need to make sure that that's accounted for and that the money is spent that way for that accountability. And third, could you give me some specific examples of what kind of hardships and specific examples of what kind of events that you all want to do? You say to increase public safety, and to help hardship cases. Could you be more specific?
So hardship cases could be, let's say, a resident, not a resident, I'm sorry, a visitor has
A tourist.
Okay. A tourist has an accident on the island and they suffer injuries, and they can't, maybe they have to stay in the area longer than they have planned and they can't afford to. So we would help to supplement the costs potentially if they have to stay longer to support the family member that was injured. Another is like transportation. If somebody's injured on the island, a tourist is injured, and it doesn't qualify for an ambulance, that they might need transportation off the island. That would be another example that we could help with the defray the costs of the transport off the island. So those types of. An example that will remain nameless, but an example that a citizen had provided was that there was a visitor that was on the island, lost their wallet. So they had no means of identification. And so one of the things were that they come to the island and that they had since left, and we were trying to track them down. They needed support financially to be able to get the wallet to the person so that they could fly home. Yeah, hurricane is another item that we could support the police department if a hurricane was coming in. We need to support the tourists that were on the island. And again, we're looking for the police department to provide us with recommendations. locations of when they spot things with certain with tourists specifically, that they identify needs of the tourists.
And events, what
Yeah,
specific
events, so
events?
right now, a couple of the events that we're looking at is in May, as I mentioned, it's Public Safety Week. And so we're gonna host an event at the new restaurant by the arena, by the marina rather, that we would do, market it to tourists as well as to our residents. And so it would be educational as well as a way for us to fundraise as well.
What kind of things do the police want to educate our tourists about that would benefit them?
So I think one of the big things is water safety, is one of the big items. And I think some of the other things that potentially would be any rules that are specific to the island that that folks might not encounter, such as, our walkways, and you need to remain in the walkways, kind of the rules we've identified for when you're on the beach, those type of things.
Use of golf carts?
Yeah, use of golf
Proper
carts,
use
yeah.
of golf carts, things like that.
Yeah. And I think we'd be looking and working with them, look to focus on things that tourists coming in are not as familiar with as our residents are. I mean, I think our residents can use the education as well, but definitely you see more of an issue with tourists. when they're on the island.
Right, in an event, you only educate the tourists that are there that day. A general education
that's-
program
Right, that's what.
for
we'd be
tourists
looking-
would be really
Right.
helpful, in my
Right.
opinion.
And I think one of the things that we look at is putting together materials with the help of the police department to provide to our local businesses, primarily the real estate companies that do the short-term rentals. And to the extent that folks are not going through property managers, that it's directly through VRB, I think we could look at that potentially. And we could work with the city on including things on the city website as well.
On the website, and for example, flyers to put in rental
Right,
houses
that's what
with,
we, yeah, right.
thank you very much.
Any other questions?
So this money is targeted to address hardships for tourists as opposed to police personnel.
So let me clarify that the money we're asking you from would be put towards tourists. The money that we have collected through other means could be used for the police department, or could be used for people that the police department have identified on the island that have a need.
Okay, so there's going to be some mechanism to segregate the funds and how they're allocated or how they're spent.
So the selection committee, as well as the advisory board, we provide a separate accounting.
One thing I just suggest, the city has a lot of ordinances, whether it's fireworks or bonfires on the beach. There's a lot of ordinances. And I think one of the things you might want to think about is coming up with a document that lists all the ordinances so that people, before they come here, they know from a safety point of view what those ordinances are, and distribute either the hard copies or the electronic copies to all the property managers, all the short-term rental people, so that they can, as a package, when they send their information to the people that are renting, they get a document that tells them what the ordinances are, so they're aware.
Yeah, and I think that happens to a certain extent, but nowhere, not to the extent it needs to, because I think that it's minimal what they provide now, like the noise ordinance. But I think to have more comprehensive, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, there's almost 1,500 short-term rental licenses in the city, and I don't know how many are managed through property managers, but there's a lot that aren't.
Right.
And we don't have, we know that tourists might have trouble getting to medical services off the island because of the one road might be blocked. The other road might be too long. would some of the things that would be considered would be a helicopter transport? I mean, if someone had an accident on the island and the police couldn't get them off the island,
I mean, potentially, if we had the money within the fund, I mean, I think the first thing is one, we need to check with their insurance cover it. And if
Right.
not, then that could be a consideration.
of course, that's an emergency thing, so
Right.
you wouldn't have time to run it through your process. So probably that wouldn't be the kind of thing you would do.
Probably because it's an immediate need, probably
Mhm.
not.
Okay.
But I can talk with Ted. We can determine with the police department. So that would probably have to be more of an after the fact, that they take the action to save the life.
Uh-huh.
And then if after the fact they couldn't afford that, then the police department could bring it to bring it to the committee.
Now, if I had a visitor in my home who was from more than 50 miles away, are they considered a tourist and would they be eligible for that?
I mean, I personally would consider them, yes. I know I'd ask for this group, so that it falls within the guidelines, but yes.
Would that fall within the guidelines?
Let's say you had somebody that got COVID and the family had already left and they were stranded here.
Uh-huh.
You had somebody else that was going to be coming in, there would be and potentially an accommodation made if they couldn't figure out how to get them other suitable housing so you could continue to.
No, I'm not talking about rentals. I'm talking about in our residents' own homes.
Yeah, and I would say.
You have a
from our
visitor, your
group,
cousin
yeah,
comes to
yeah,
visit
so
you.
I would say from our group, we would consider that a tourist. But, I was asking for your thoughts, I think, in terms of how you define tourist.
That might have to be clarified with the state office, just to keep us in compliance so we know up front.
Any further discussion? Okay. Do I hear a motion?
I would make a motion to amend. I think they'll be pleased with it, but since this is a first time event, and we have some other information and we're only advisory, I think it goes from us to Ways and Means, then the council for the first year. I propose that we amend this to $2,500 rather than the $5,000.
So there's no motion on the table, so you can make a motion.
All right.
There's no motion on the table.
I would make a motion. I would make the motion to approve $2,500.
Second?
To recommend the council.
Yes, that we recommend that they approve $2,500.
By the second?
Oh, I thought you seconded it.
Yeah.
Okay. I would second that, and then I would amend that to make sure that,
Well, you seconded and then we had a discussion.
then you have to discuss, then you have to vote, then you can amend.
Well, you can, why don't you say what you want to do before you make the motion? What do you want, what is it that you're trying to amend it to? Without making a motion, what do you want to do?
Mr. Truslow made the motion.
Correct. And you said you wanted to amend it.
We might want to add to that clarification that it's just for tourists to keep us in compliance.
That's
Five.
That's implied. Okay. I second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the $2,500 motion?
Aye.
Aye.
I don't think it falls within our ATAX purview. I think it's a good operation, good idea, but I don't think it falls within ATAX.
Okay, are we, Nicole, we're good?
Yes, sir. Did you want to go into executive session?
Okay,
Thank you.
prior to going into
I
exec,
just have one question. So to the next level, that the Ways and Means, I think we need further clarification of documentation, so we'll make sure we get that over. And does it go to the treasurer? Okay, thank you.
before we consider the executive session question, I'd like to, target a date for the next meeting. in February. I would propose Wednesday, February 16th.
Okay, I'm out of the country then,
How long are you out of the country?
until the 17th.
I try to schedule these meetings prior to Ways and Means and prior to City Council. So I think City Council is it the fourth Tuesday of every month?
Yes,
So that would be the 22nd.
and Ways and Means is the third Tuesday, so you're looking at the first or second week of the month. If you want to, have the meeting before.
Okay,
About the 9th.
yeah, how does the 9th?
I'm gone the 7th.
I'm sorry,
I'm gone the
you're
7th.
gone the 7th. So you're gone the 7th to the 17th.
Technically, I get back the 16th, but yeah.
Well, just a matter of having a quorum. I mean, so, if you can't be there, I think we would just go ahead and try to have a quorum for February 9th.
So February 9th, we have municipal court, and I believe we already have a couple of committee meetings.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell me what works in your calendar rather than me fishing?
We could do 10 o'clock or 11 on the 9th. We have court at 1, so that's.
Okay, I would rather go to 10 o'clock just because we don't seem to get things done quickly. So if 10 o'clock works for everybody, that would be my preference for the 9th of February.
Right, and just to comment on that, when I first joined the committee, it looked like we were always meeting on the second Wednesdays. Prior to even being appointed to this committee, I already had this commitment, which conflicted with the second Wednesday, if that is the second Wednesday. We have been up to this point adjusting for people's schedules. If I know it's always going to be on the second Wednesday, anything I plan in the future, I will make sure there's not a conflict. But this was even planned before I was even appointed. So will we generally be meeting the second Wednesday, and will we be adjusting for people's schedules or not? Just so I know how to plan my life. I think that's a chairperson question who suggests the meeting. Just
Yeah, if we want to have some structure so that we can plan our calendars,
yeah,
let's go ahead with the idea that we would be meeting on the second Wednesday of every
okay,
month. And the time will be determined, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever, on the meeting prior to that meeting.
okay. And so only if it's indicated that a quorum won't be there, would there be a consideration for moving it?
Well, if there's no quorum, there's no meeting.
Exactly.
So we would then have to reschedule at that point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, February 9th, 10 o'clock. Okay, next item, executive session. I don't think I need to repeat what I had said, but I will if it's necessary. I would need a motion, I believe, from the committee to whether or not we go into executive session. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion, we don't.
You don't need to do that. Yeah. You don't have, just take no action, that way we keep motions.
Right. The only positive.
Yeah, just positive.
Be positive that you don't want to have a motion.
They're not able to be here, so it's kind of a moot point.
Oh, I see.
Is that a motion on the
Oh,
floor?
because of
Yeah.
the
The
conflict.
conflict of time,
I make
so-
a motion that we go into executive session because of the necessity of this committee to receive information.
Second. No second.
Is the chairperson able to second the motion? Okay, just wondering.
Motion fails. I have a motion to return.
Could I ask a question first to see if we can expedite some of the things that we could, in deference to our administration and to Mr. Halverson, or this, especially while he's here, are there certain things that we can discuss in public? I think we've expressed, or I've expressed clearly that I would like to have as much as we could discussed in public. For example, this wouldn't call for any kind of confidential communication, but how was our current DMO selected, by whom, what documentation there is to support it? That ought to be public. If we've made an error, how do we fix it? Which would go into executive session. I clearly understand that. In terms of a contract, metrics, and oversight recommendations, that would be something that I'm not so sure about, but I could understand going into executive session. A process for us to act for metrics and oversight in light of the domains case would seem to me to be public. That'd be clearly public. I mean, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to do it?
I can answer the procurement question, and this is something that we've looked at before. The city's budget, which is approved by council through an ordinance, which requires two readings, include the allocation to the existing DMO, and it's listed as a Charleston Area District 0. That we believe, confidently believe that is an appropriate selection of the existing DMO. And that is approved by council, again, by ordinance that requires two readings.
Can I ask a question about that? I would contend that line item on the budget is a placeholder more than it is a commitment. And I would use the example that if the city also has a budget and they're intending to buy a fire truck or a police vehicle or rescue vehicle, they haven't decided whether they're buying a Ford or a Chevy. They're just deciding that they're buying a vehicle. And that's my interpretation of it. So I would say that the same could apply to the 30% ATAX funds, because that decision on, I don't think approving, if you apply the same logic that you're budgeting for an expenditure, but you're not committing the expenditure to a specific provider, there's a direct analogy there that you should have latitude to spend the money in alternative places than just that one detailed provider.
Correct, and I don't disagree with that, but until an alternative is created
Right.
by the city, at that point, the city council will have an opportunity to decide how to distribute that money if it decides to create a new, a specific DMO for the city.
How do we know there's not an alternative? There's not been an RFP done.
There is, to my knowledge, there is no other Charleston, there's no other regional tourism organization in the area that has an ongoing tourist promotion program, which is what the state law requires. Until one exists, which the other option is presented to the city to create one. At that point, the city can decide, which is, I believe, the recommendation that this committee has made to city council to evaluate what those alternatives are. So we'll have that discussion with city council and certainly provide them advice about what the alternatives are and receive guidance from them about how they want us.
Okay, so because of the actions that have happened today as well, then our committee will not get any attorney time to discuss anything or to have questions answered or to have further understanding so that we can act better on behalf of the taxpayers and as representative of the state to oversee the tax money.
So there was a motion on the table, it wasn't seconded, so Robert's rule establishes that motion that's not seconded, it fails. So you all to entertain a motion and vote to go into executive session. That's not up to me.
And then I made a motion to do part in public and then if necessary to go into executive, and that failed. Therefore, we get no
I understand
information.
that. Yeah, I understand
So we
that.
get no attorney information at all to this committee as a result of that.
As a result of the actions of this committee.
Okay.
I've got 3 comments. The city budget went through a 3rd reading. I think it was in May, but we, without even having us have the first level of review required under the domains case. It didn't come to us until I think July. So if we're going to follow this logic, it seems that this advisory committee review of anything would be meaningless. I can't understand how that complies with the domains case that says we're supposed to be the first level of review. If a budget is already decided, a sole source has decided somehow in secret, we don't know, no documentation, no oversight. I'm trying to square that with the domains case. So I'm looking first of all as threshold to say, how was this, who decided this, when? Because we hadn't even addressed the issue and it had already been decided. What Ray said was there was a placeholder, that's by statute, that the 30% rule goes to somebody. It doesn't say to whom it goes. Council couldn't make a decision to give it to somebody without, maybe Mr. Halverson can weigh in, but how do they just give it to somebody without, I'm not saying that it was a wrong decision to give it to CVB for this discussion, but how is it done without compliance with the procurement code? That's maybe where I need Mr. Halverson to give me some help.
Well, with all due respect, I think that there was a motion that was presented to the committee to have this discussion, to add it to the agenda, so that there should be a general discussion of ATAX and the allocation. And I believe that motion failed. Therefore, I think it's inappropriate to have this discussion if the committee did not approve a motion to have this discussion. But
Well-
you all can entertain another motion again. But I think that we're going into a discussion that the committee has already decided it didn't want to add to the agenda.
I asked that this be put specifically, asked you to put it on the budget. Excuse me, on the agenda. I sent you an email and asked that I copied Mr. Burns so we could do as much as we could do in public. I just don't, I like having everything out and open and not hidden unless it's absolutely necessary. Areas where Mr. Halverson could help us in executive session would be terms of a contract or what we would advise council, but we can't even advise council if we don't know.
I believe that the committee has already advised council by the motion that's going to be presented to the council later this month. The committee has already made several motions that will be presented to council.
So in the future, will this committee be denied unless we go into executive session, the benefit of attorney information?
And I think I can clarify that for you. If there is a specific question on the law or the procedure, happy to address that, okay? But if it's trending into the issues that you all have discussed about why you want me to come and talk to you about, those are things that would be properly in executive session.
Okay, so the motion was made to handle it that way and it did fail. So that means we'll have no discussion and no attorney by our own actions.
Well, could I ask Mr. Halverson, does the procurement code, is it applicable and what documents support that we've complied with the procurement code?
I mean, as Ms. Fregoso said, I think that those you guys procedurally would need to make a motion to add that this general discussion to the agenda since it's not already on the agenda, or go into executive session, which you all just voted not to do. So one of those two. So procedurally, it's just the way things have to move. Putting the cart before the horse.
I understand what Dave said is, it's a moot issue that we're not going to have time to have this discussion today anyway. I just want to know how to, I understand exactly what you said. We don't have time to even discuss it today. So we're not going to get it done. How do we get this on the agenda, or have as much done in public as we can going forward? I asked for it to be, for this meeting, I asked to do as much as we could in public, understanding that there were some things where we might not, we might need to be in executive session. How do I get this on the agenda?
What I suggest is we wait for city council to weigh in on the three motions we have on the table.
Okay.
And if city council, depending on how they determine what they want us to do after next week, they may say, we're good with what we're doing and we don't need to have any further action, or they may give us more assignments. Once we have those assignments, these same questions are going to be there. And those same questions could be then put on the agenda to be addressed at our next meeting.
Can I ask that something be put on the agenda, or is it, who decides? What's it?
Typically, the chair will indicate,
For the next meeting.
Okay, all right, I'm okay with that.
Okay, any further questions?
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.